Toronto didn't always feel like this. There was a time when the city moved slower and trusted more. Saturday afternoons meant crowded sidewalks on Yonge Street, streetcar bells cutting through the noise, and no one asking where you were going or why. Childhood was measured by streetlights, not screens. Neighborhoods raised their own, and the city felt big, but never distant. This isn't a story about the 1970s. It's a memory of what it felt like to live there.
Saturday afternoon, you drift into the crowd on Yonge Street without really thinking about it. The sidewalk is packed, shoulder to shoulder, everyone moving in the same direction, as if there's some unspoken agreement about where they're headed. Up ahead is Sam the Record Man, its red and yellow neon signs spinning overhead, their light reflecting off the pavement, still damp from a rain that stopped not long ago. The air feels cool, with a faint smell of wet asphalt hanging around. This is Toronto in the 1970s, alive, a little messy, and never standing still. As soon as you step inside the store, you're swallowed by the smell of vinyl, cardboard sleeves, and too many people in a tight space. It's crowded, almost uncomfortably so, yet somehow it feels right. Elton John is playing over the speakers, not loud enough to demand attention, just there in the background. You flip through the record bins, your fingers brushing along album spines, not really looking for anything specific. You just know something will catch your eye eventually. The cashier doesn't look up. No one asks what you need. You could stand there for hours and nobody would bother you. When you step back outside, the city rushes in all at once. A streetcar rattles past, its bell clanging sharply at a taxi that cuts in too close. Someone shouts, a horn blares, and then it all blends back into the noise of the street. The city keeps moving, no matter what. Toronto feels louder now, busier than it used to be, with more cars, more people, more of everything. Beneath your feet, the subway rolls by, making the pavement tremble slightly. You can't see it, but you feel it through the soles of your shoes, a steady, familiar heartbeat of the city, quietly reminding you that it's always there. You step out of the store and are immediately pulled back into the city's restless rhythm. A streetcar sways past, its bell ringing sharply as the driver yells at a taxi that's cut in too close. A horn blares, someone swears, and then it all dissolves into the familiar noise of Toronto. This city doesn't pause. It just keeps getting busier, louder, with more cars and more people than before. Even when you're standing still, the city is moving beneath you. The subway runs steadily under the street, every few minutes sending a faint vibration up through the pavement. You're so used to it, you hardly notice anymore. But if you stop and pay attention, you can feel it through the soles of your shoes. You head down to the Bloor Danforth line to get home. The platform smells like damp concrete, metal, and brake dust. When the train arrives, it screams against the rails, the doors sliding open before it's fully stopped. You push into a car that's already crowded. There's nowhere to sit, so you grab a pole near the door and stand for the ride. Broadview, Chester, Pape. The announcer's voice crackles over the speakers, sometimes clear, sometimes swallowed by the grind of metal on metal. Inside the car, everyone stays wrapped in their own small world. An old man folds his newspaper down to nothing. A woman clutches her shopping bags, staring blankly at the floor. A teenage kid leans against the doors, a small radio pressed to his ear, music leaking out. No one looks at anyone else. No one feels the need to. The train rocks back and forth, and everyone rocks with it, almost without thinking. At your stop, you step off and walk the 4 blocks home. Your neighborhood is quieter than downtown, but never completely silent. There's still the hum of a lawnmower, even though it's already October. A kid zips past on a bike. Somewhere nearby, hockey sticks clack against the pavement. Toronto is still there, in all its ordinary ways. A place where noise and calm exist side by side, without anyone trying to separate.
You reach your neighborhood as the pace finally eases a little. It's calmer than downtown, but it's never truly quiet. Somewhere nearby, a lawnmower is still running, even though it's already October. A kid glides past on a long banana seat bike, high handlebars wobbling slightly as the tires rattle over the street. A few houses down, a group of kids are playing road hockey, sticks cracking sharply against the pavement. When a car comes through, they all shout, "Car!" and drag the nets out of the way. You've stood in that exact spot and done that exact thing more times than you can count. The neighborhood changes so slowly, you barely notice it happening. It's only when you stop and think that you realize how different it's become. The Italian family next door moved up to Woodbridge last year. The corner store changed owners, and the new ones speak a language you don't understand. The empty lot where you used to build forts and dig holes and play all day is gone now, replaced by a low-rise apartment building that went up in just a few months. More people, more cars. The city keeps growing, inch by inch, spreading outward and stretching upward at the same time. Inside the house, the smell of frying onions and ground beef fills the kitchen. Your mom is making dinner, the radio tuned to CBC, murmuring news about the economy, the city, grown-up concerns. She glances at you and asks if you're hungry, even though the answer is always the same. You grab an apple from the bowl on the counter and head upstairs. Your room is small, just big enough for a bed, a dresser, and a window looking out onto the backyard. Posters cover the walls, whatever band or hockey player you're into this month. On the floor, there's a stack of comic books you've read so many times you could recite them. You lie on your bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the familiar sounds of the house. The furnace kicking on, your mom moving around in the kitchen, a siren wailing somewhere in the distance. The city is always there, even when you can't see it. At 6 o'clock, everyone sits down to eat. Your dad comes home, hangs up his coat, and takes his seat without saying much. Meatloaf, mashed potatoes, canned corn. No TV, just the scrape of forks on plates. Your dad mentions gas prices going up again. Your mom says she heard it on the news too. After dinner, the TV comes on. 3 familiar channels. On winter Saturday nights, it's hockey, and when the game starts, the whole house falls quiet, as if that's just the way things are supposed to be. After school, you drop your bag at home and disappear, usually for hours at a time. No one asks where you're going, and no one checks up on you. Some days, you head down the familiar path into the ravine, slipping along dirt trails and steep slopes until you're fully tucked away in a pocket of green, cut off from the city. Down there, the noise of traffic fades, replaced by the rustle of leaves and the steady sound of a small creek. You and a few other kids gather branches and scraps of old wood, building crooked forts and inventing stories to go with them. You stay until the light shifts and the sky starts to darken. On days you don't head into the ravine, the whole world fits neatly onto your street. A road hockey game breaks out right in the middle of the road, sticks clacking against the pavement, laughter mixing with shouted rules and arguments. Sometimes you hop on your bike and ride in loose circles with no real destination, pedaling until you're dizzy and the wind makes your eyes water. There's only one rule, and everyone knows it. Be home when the streetlights come on. No phone calls, no checking in, no questions. You're completely free, as long as you're on time. Late means trouble. On time means no one says a word. It's that simple. Winter changes everything. Christie Pits fills with snow and turns into the go-to place for sledding. You haul your sled up the hill, legs burning, then launch yourself down at a speed that makes your eyes sting from the cold air. Over and over again, until your jeans are soaked through and your fingers are numb inside your mittens. All around you, other kids are doing the exact same thing. You don't need to know their names, just whose turn it is. Someone's older brother has built a jump at the bottom of the hill, and even though everyone knows it's a bad idea, no one wants to sit it out. When you finally get home, your wet clothes go straight onto the radiator. Steam rises, carrying the smell of melting snow and damp wool. Your mom has soup ready. Maybe it's just canned chicken noodle, but it's hot, and that's all that matters. You eat standing at the kitchen counter, hands wrapped around the bowl for warmth. Outside, the city is cold and loud, but in that moment, your Toronto feels small, familiar, and safe.
Summer in Toronto slows everything down in its own way. The days stretch long, and you stay outside until the streetlights flick on, sometimes pushing it a little past that. The ice cream truck creeps through the neighborhood, playing its familiar tune, the kind you recognize the second you hear it. You sprint back inside, dig through the couch cushions for loose change, then race back out before it disappears around the corner. A popsicle costs 25 cents. You sit on the curb and eat it fast, sticky juice running down your hands, not caring at all. The park becomes your second home. Swings, monkey bars, and an old metal slide that burns your legs if you go down in shorts. You can spend the entire day there, only heading home when you're hungry, thirsty, or when your mom calls out from the porch. Kids drift in and out all day long, falling into games with no real rules. Tag, hide and seek, made-up worlds that last for hours. Time passes without anyone noticing. Late August means the CNE, the final week before school starts again. The whole family goes together, and the moment you step through the gates, you're hit with a wall of noise and smell. Everything is deep-fried. Cotton candy, popcorn, and the diesel fumes from the rides all mix in the warm air. The midway is packed. Kids run between games, chasing stuffed animals they don't really need. Your dad hands you $5 and tells you to make it last. You spend it all in 20 minutes. You ride the zipper until your head spins, eat corn on the cob dripping with butter, your hands slick and greasy. When night falls, fireworks explode over the lake. For a few minutes, the whole city is looking in the same direction, red and gold lights reflecting off the water. On the streetcar ride home, you're completely worn out, your head resting against the window as the city slides by in the dark. Downtown is changing, but you don't think much about that then. To you, Toronto is still Toronto, loud, alive, and full in a way that feels just right. Toronto in the 1970s runs on a rhythm you grow so used to, you hardly think about it anymore. The subway is how you get almost everywhere. The map of the city lives in your head. The Bloor Danforth line running east to west. The Yonge University line stretching north to south. Transfer at Bloor Yonge or St. George, and you can reach just about any corner of the city. A ride costs 35 cents. When it's crowded, you stand. When it's not, you sit. No big deal. The subway cars always smell like metal, brake dust, and something else you can never quite name. The floors are usually wet, from snow or rain tracked in on everyone's boots. Some days, you ride the subway for no particular reason at all, going to the end of one line, switching downtown, then heading back the other way. It takes a couple of hours and costs you nothing but time. You watch people get on and off, trying to guess where they're headed, what their lives might be like. The street you live on has its own rhythm too. The bread truck comes on Wednesdays, the milkman on Fridays, and once a month the knife sharpener rolls by, his truck playing cheerful carousel-like music. Your mom hands over the kitchen knives wrapped in a towel, and 5 minutes later they're back, sharp enough to slice tomatoes paper thin. The mailman knows your family, knows which days your mom gets letters from her sister in Vancouver. The garbage collectors know which houses set out extra bags and which ones always forget to bring the bins to the curb. Everything runs on trust. Mr. Chen at the corner store lets you buy candy on credit if you promise to pay him back next week. Neighbors stay on the same street for generations, familiar enough that no one needs to explain anything. On Fridays, when your dad gets paid, everything is settled. One Sunday, your dad drives the family out to Scarborough to look at new houses. Rows of bungalows sit on streets that barely existed 6 months ago. The model homes smell like fresh paint and sawdust. Your mom opens cabinets, tests faucets, looks out at yards that are still mostly mud. Your dad talks about square footage, mortgage rates, and schools. You trail along behind them, bored, wondering why anyone would want to leave the city. On the drive back, the CN Tower is rising downtown, taller every month. The adults talk about the future. For you, Toronto is just the present, familiar, understandable, and enough. When night falls, the city slows down, but it never truly goes quiet. Even when everything seems calmer, you can still hear traffic humming in the distance, steady and constant, like background noise that never switches off. Streetlights cast a soft orange glow, turning the piles of snow along the curb a dirty yellow. Somewhere, a dog barks a few streets over. A screen door slams shut nearby. The sound of a television drifts out through a half-open window. All of it blends together into something familiar, the sound of Toronto at night. Your mom calls you inside. You leave your boots by the door and hang your coat on its hook. Inside, it's warm, the lights feel softer, and everything slows down. Another day is over. Toronto in the 1970s was never perfect. The city was crowded and loud, prices kept climbing, and the subway was always packed. Streetcars were slow, winters were long and cold, and some days everything felt heavier than it needed to be. But in exchange, life felt predictable, almost comforting. You knew where everything was. You knew which corner to turn to get home faster, which stores were cheaper, which streets stayed quieter at night. You understood your neighborhood, and your neighborhood recognized you. Nothing needed to be explained. Things just worked. Those memories don't fade. Even now, you can close your eyes and hear the subway rumbling beneath your feet. You can still smell vinyl inside the record store, still feel the weight of grocery bags from Kensington Market cutting into your fingers. The city is still there. The subway still runs. Streetcars still ring their bells. But that Toronto is gone. Now it only shows up in small moments. The sound of a streetcar bell on a Saturday afternoon. The smell of wet pavement on Yonge Street after the rain. The feeling of sitting on an almost empty train, watching the city slip away into darkness outside the window. And if you lived through those years, that's all it takes. One moment like that, and everything comes back. Toronto in the 1970s wasn't an ideal city, and the people who lived there didn't need to say it out loud to know it. It was loud and crowded, and prices went up year after year. The subway was always packed, streetcars moved slowly, and winters felt long and unforgiving. And yet, in the middle of all that inconvenience, The city offered something solid, a sense of stability that was hard to explain. You knew where everything was and how it worked. You knew which subway line to take, where to transfer, which route would get you home the fastest. You knew which stores were cheaper, which shop owners recognized you, which neighborhoods stayed noisy, and which ones settled down at night. The city didn't confuse you. It was familiar enough that you could move through it without thinking. The neighborhood you lived in wasn't just a place to sleep. The mail carrier knew your family's name. The owner of the corner store remembered what you usually bought. Neighbors recognized you by the sound of your footsteps running past their porch. Those connections didn't need paperwork or explanations. They existed naturally, built over time. Those feelings stayed with you. Even years later, if you paused for a moment, you could still hear the subway rumbling underground, feel the gentle sway of a train rounding a curve. You could still remember the smell of vinyl and cardboard in the record store, the weight of heavy grocery bags from Kensington Market pulling at your fingers. These weren't just images, they were physical memories. Toronto still exists today. The subway still runs, and streetcars still ring their bells along the tracks. But the Toronto of the 1970s has slipped into the past. Now it lives in small moments. A sudden streetcar bell, the smell of wet pavement after rain, the glow of lights reflected in a window as you ride home on a nearly empty train. It wasn't a perfect city, but it was familiar enough to make you feel like you belonged. And for anyone who lived there then, that feeling never truly disappears. Toronto in the 1970s slowly fades away in a very quiet way. There's no single moment that marks the end, just a gradual realization that the city you once knew has begun to change. It's still there, with subway lines running beneath the streets and streetcars gliding along familiar routes. But the Toronto of those days is no longer quite the same. When you look back, the memories don't come as sharp images. They come as sounds, smells, and sensations. You can still hear the subway rumbling under your feet, the steady clatter of metal on rails, repeating like the city's own breathing. You remember the smell of vinyl and cardboard inside the record store on Yonge Street, a place where simply standing still made you feel like you belonged. You remember the weight of grocery bags from Kensington Market pulling at your fingers, uncomfortable but familiar. At the time, these details barely registered. Later, they became impossible to forget. Toronto back then wasn't perfect. It was crowded, noisy, cold in the winter, and steadily getting more expensive. But it was easy to live in its own way. You knew where you were going. You knew your place in the flow of the city. Your neighborhood had its own rhythm, and you moved along with it without thinking. Now the city feels different. Buildings are taller, streets are busier, and everything seems to move faster. Still, the Toronto of the 1970s exists somewhere else, in memory. It lives in the sudden ring of a streetcar bell, in the smell of wet pavement after a rainstorm, in the quiet moment of sitting on a nearly empty train and watching city lights slide past the window. And if you were there, if you lived through those years, no one needs to explain it to you. One familiar sound is enough, and the whole city comes back on its own. Toronto in the 1970s didn't end with a clear turning point. It simply drifted backward, so quietly that by the time you noticed, you were already standing in a different moment. The city is still there. The subway still runs beneath the streets. Streetcars still ring their bells along the tracks, but the Toronto you once lived in is no longer whole in the same way. It never disappeared completely. It just shifted into something else, living on in memory and in feelings that are hard to name. In the sound of a streetcar bell on a Saturday afternoon, in the smell of wet pavement on Yonge Street after the rain, in the feeling of sitting on a nearly empty train, your head resting against the window, watching city lights stretch into soft blurs in the dark. These aren't big moments, but they're the ones that last. Toronto in the 1970s was never perfect. It was loud and crowded, prices rose every year, and winters were long and unforgiving. Traffic was heavy, trains were packed, and some days everything felt like too much. But in return, the city offered familiarity. You knew where you were, you knew how to get home, you knew your neighborhood and the people in it. The city didn't feel distant, and you didn't feel lost inside it. Time moves on, and everything changes. Familiar streets grow taller, faster, and noisier. But the Toronto of the 1970s is still there, just no longer on any map. It lives in the memories of those who were there. And if you were one of them, you don't need to explain it or tell the story again. All it takes is a single sound, a familiar smell, or an ordinary moment, and the whole city comes back exactly as it was.